Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome back. So, I think tonight would be a great opportunity to do another story time. And I'm kind of in between traveling blogs, and I figure it'd be a good night to just stay home and do another story time for you guys. I'm sorry if it's a little echoey in here. It's kind of this is my study room, my study. There's not a whole lot of insulation or furniture and stuff in here, so I have my microphone hooked up, my Rode mic hooked up, so hopefully it's a little bit less echoey for you. But anyway, going to jump right in. So this famous photograph that I'm standing in front of right here, which is framed and it's on the wall in my study, is a famous World War II photograph. And so for some of you history buffs, I'm sure you recognize it or vaguely recognize it. Or even if you're not a history buff, you probably still recognize it or have seen it around. So I'm going to tell you a little brief history and story leading up to this photograph being taken. And I'm going to tell you how I have a family connection and history with this photo here. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's jump right in and let's go. Okay, so on October 20th, 1944, as seen in this photo, General MacArthur essentially makes a beachhead from this Higgins boat, ironically, which was built in New Orleans. All the Higgins boats were built in New Orleans, which is why the World War II Museum is in New Orleans, solely because it's the general consensus that without the Higgins boats concept and without them, without those types of boats, we probably wouldn't have won the war. And so, back to the story, they chose this photo op, which was a staged photo op, but the event was real. And it was General MacArthur's, who's right here. That's General Mac right there. And this is his, his officer counterparts here, his sidekicks or whatever you call them, his right-hand men, made a beach landing here at the Philippines just a few hours after the rest of the fleet, as you can see in the background, arrived. And during the war, the Japanese pretty much drove him out. He had to leave his beloved Philippines because the Japanese were invading and all that. And so on October 20th, 1944, he returned with the phrase, "My people of the Philippines, I have returned." And so the cool part about this photo is that I have a family connection to it. And I'll get to that in a second. But look how cool that is. Like all these big, like carriers and battleships in the background there. It's a real event. Like it's a real event. Like I said, the photo was staged. This photo has different, you'll see different iterations of this photo of him walking out of the Higgins boat or multiple Higgins boats. There's different angles of the picture. There's different people walking next to him in each photo. I'd say there's probably about 4, 5, 6 different ones. This one's a pretty widespread accepted photo because this is the one that's in the Time Life book that I showed you guys and all that. And it's just it's a very aesthetically centered photo. I think maybe that's probably why they seem to go with this one quite a bit. So anyway, so back to the story. So I'm trying to stay focused here and not get too distracted because it's such a cool photo. But it was a redeeming moment for MacArthur and the U.S. Army. He was head of basically the Pacific Fleet. There's MacArthur's army and then there was Patton's army. Patton's army was more of like the European front, and MacArthur was more of the Pacific front. My mom's father actually fought in the Pacific at this time. Like he was actually in the army, in MacArthur's army essentially, and fought in, he fought in Okinawa, where I was actually stationed when I was in the Marine Corps for a year. And it was pretty surreal to know that he fought there, and he fought all over in Japan and all that stuff. So basically a war hero. He fought out there for about 4 years straight. So about 2 years earlier, so 1942, dating back to about 2 years before all this happened, like I said, I was talking about the redeeming moment for MacArthur. Despite the early warning given When the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, General MacArthur's forces in the Philippines were unprepared on December 8th, which was the day after Pearl Harbor, when the Japanese Air Force attacked. And they destroyed nearly 50% of the American warplanes at Clark Field, most of which were still on the ground. And Clark Field is in the Philippines. I've been there. I've actually been to Clark Field when I was stationed in Japan, and I got sent to a deployment, on a deployment to support the mudslide. There's a mudslide that happened in the Philippines, and we were sent to the other side of the Philippines. I forgot if I was in north or south, and the mudslide happened north or south. I don't remember that, but I remember that a mudslide happened, and they sent us to Clark Field, which used to be a United States Air Force base, and they've handed it over since to the Philippines. But we still, obviously the American forces, people like us, we go and kind of set up camp there and run operations there if we need to. So anyway, going back to the story, like I said, by January, the Japanese had driven the Allied forces onto the Bataan Peninsula, and the situation was pretty desperate. General MacArthur, he was forced to move his headquarters to the island fortress of Corregidor, and as the situation deteriorated, President Roosevelt ordered the general to leave for his own safety, which he didn't want to do. So the general and his family and his closest aides, basically, they were forced to escape in the middle of the night and relocate to Australia. And when he arrived in Australia, excuse me, I'm getting all tongue-tied here. When he arrived in Australia, he made the famous declaration, "I came through and I shall return," talking about the Philippines. So, he kind of had to stay away for a while the Japanese were kind of wreaking havoc in the area. I can't talk as usual, guys. You shouldn't be surprised if you watch my videos. But he had to kind of like hide out, kind of just stay away for a while. And then on October 20th, 1944, 2 years later, he made his return, and he stated it throughout the next 2 years. And, throughout the campaign and all that, of the war and all that, he continually said in multiple different occurrences, in multiple different places, in times when he was speaking or making, if he simply had things to say, he would usually bring that up. He would say, "I will return to the Philippines. I will return to the Philippines. Those are my people. That's my, my beloved Philippines," And so, and there's a backstory about it with him. And his father was actually, MacArthur's dad was a Civil War soldier, basically like a Civil War hero. And I think that he was some kind of ambassador to the Philippines or something. Let me see here. Yeah, I was trying to look really quick to see if I could research and find out more about his father. But I think his father was either ambassador to the Philippines or something along those lines. I could be misquoting that, guys. I'm so sorry. It wasn't really the focus of my story, but it was kind of a side note. But I do apologize for that. But maybe it's something you guys can look into and let me know more about if you are in the mood to do so. But anyway, so after his declaration, "I came through and I shall return," all that stuff, President Roosevelt, after that, awarded General MacArthur the Medal of Honor for his courageous defense of the Philippines. But in fact, the public support masked a deep tension between the president and his most difficult general. I'm reading this off of the internet, guys. The White House had asked the general to change his declaration from "I shall return" to "We shall return," but the general refused. The animus between FDR and General MacArthur goes back many years, as early as 1932, when he was still governor of New York. Franklin D. Roosevelt told a close advisor that he thought Douglas MacArthur was one of the two most dangerous men in America. Imagine that, huh? So Franklin Roosevelt and Douglas MacArthur had first met in 1916 as the nation was preparing for the First World War. Blech. MacArthur was a major on the Army's general staff, and FDR was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. For the next 3 decades, their paths would cross again and again. President Roosevelt once told MacArthur, "Douglas, I think you are our best general, but I believe you would be our worst politician." So Franklin D. Roosevelt, again, was furious when he was first told that the U.S. Far East Air Force had been caught, quote unquote, on the ground when the Japanese attacked. So many military historians have judged General MacArthur harshly for his lack of preparation and the subsequent defeat of Allied forces in the Philippines. Early 1942 was a very dark time for the Allies, with Nazi forces sweeping across Europe and Russia. The Japanese Navy, in control of most of the Western Pacific, and the British Empire under siege. Sorry. I'm getting distracted here, guys. My apologies. While there are many reasons to blame General MacArthur for the humiliating surrender of the American and British forces in Corregidor and the brutal Bataan death march that followed, some of you might know about that, especially the Marines, President Roosevelt applied a different strategy. Always the wise political leader, FDR understood that what the American public needed was a hero, not a scapegoat. So he promoted General MacArthur to Supreme Commander of the Southwest Pacific Forces. That's a title, huh? In that role, the general began preparing for his return to the Philippines. And on October 20th, 1944, in this picture here, he fulfilled his plans and stepped ashore with the whole world watching. President Roosevelt my goodness, folks, I cannot read for anything. President Roosevelt sent him this telegram congratulating him on his victory. In fact, General MacArthur came ashore while the battle was still raging, and against the advice of his senior staff, and always aware of his role as an historic figure, MacArthur delivered his prepared speech with, as Prime Minister Winston Churchill might say, great vigor. And he says, this was his speech right here. People of the Philippines, I have returned. By the grace of Almighty God, our forces stand again on Philippine soil consecrated in the blood of our two peoples. We have come dedicated and committed to the task of destroying every vestige of enemy control over your daily lives and restoring upon a foundation of indestructible strength the liberties of your people. I hope I didn't butcher that too much with my illiteracy going on these days. But anyway, so that's the backstory of it. There's way more history in all this. I mean, I can go on for hours reading about all this stuff, but that's basically the story of, the 2 years leading up to this, and he, General MacArthur having to flee with his forces and then kind of hang out and then come back. But he did come back. And so, like I said, my grandmother, I'm all over the place today. My mother's dad, my grandfather, Mr. Joseph Rovnak, who actually died the year I was born. He died about 2-3 months before I was even born. My mom was super pregnant with me when he passed. And super sad story. He lived most of his life in California, most of his adult life in California. He's from Pennsylvania, and then they moved to Indiana temporarily, and then they continued on to California, where they lived for the next, 30 years, maybe 25, 30 years, something like that. And he was in the war, and he came back from the war and basically delivered mail. He was a mailman, postal route guy. Like, he's a guy who had a sack full of mail, and he walked up and down the street and put your mail in your mailboxes. And he was definitely one of those men who was very torn and shell-shocked, they called it back then, in those days. And he was very torn by the war, which is what I was trying to say just now. And he suffered greatly. He, not to get into too many details, but he medicated very heavily with things that weren't medicine, and so he led a tough life, and he suffered from it. But most of those guys did. My grandfather was in the field for 4 years, just in the trenches, killing people and fighting the war, fighting battles, and so basically a grunt on the ground for 4 years. And obviously you don't come back from that being completely normal. He suffered from that hugely. And if you look at many of the men that served at that time, most of them, the majority of them, you'll see were all born right around 1920. Like those kids are all, 18, 19, 20 years old when they joined the war, after Pearl Harbor and all that stuff. So if you look at when the majority of those men died, they're all right around 1980, between 1980 and 1990. They all kind of came home and sort of did the same thing. They tried their best to lead their lives day to day, and then usually at night, you've heard it before, like night terrors, flashbacks, stuff like that. And he and my grandmother and my mother and her siblings, they all suffered greatly from it. They had a rough time with it, but it was almost untreatable back then, and that's very, very sad. But so one day in the war, my grandfather kept in touch with his sister. I don't remember which one it was. I don't want to say the wrong name. And he would correspond with her a lot, like write letters back and forth to her. I guess they were super close, maybe. And I assume, and he would correspond with her more than anybody else and just kind of tell her the days, ins and outs and day in and day outs of what they were doing and all that. And so one day she gets a letter in the mail and from him, and he's in the Pacific somewhere, and he says, "Hey, well, this is what I'm up to today, or the last few days, or since I last wrote, and a cool thing happened. General MacArthur made an appearance, and he came to not say he came to his aid, he came to where they were set up, and where the mission was that day or whatever." And he says, "I got to meet him." And he's writing, this is all in the letter, and I'm paraphrasing it, of course. And he's saying this, I got to meet Mac. Everybody called him Mac back then, excuse me. And he's like, "Yeah, I got to, it's a cool event. They had this, big photo op and stuff like that, and I got to meet him." And so later in the letter, I remember reading those letters. My aunts and uncles actually have copies of those letters. It's super cool. Maybe in another vlog I might do something about that, and maybe read some of those to you guys if that would be something you're interested in. But he talks about how he can't wait to have his his sisters, like apple pie and stuff like that, like the all American stuff. And it really does say stuff like that. He's like, "I just miss, I miss your food. I miss all this stuff." And he can't wait to get back. You can see it. And I've been there before, where you miss home. You're in another country and you're across the world and you just miss home, And you could see his heartfelt letters were full of that. Just like heartwarming, like, "I just can't wait to get back. I'm tired of this war." It's like anybody at those times would have said, and how they all felt. So, you read the letter. It's about a 1 or 2 page letter, and then you get to this newspaper clipping on the back of that same letter that he mailed out to her. And what that picture is the picture that you're looking at right here. And I wish I had a copy of that letter to show you guys the actual thing. But in the letter, or the copy of the newspaper clip, it wasn't a copy because you couldn't make copies back then, but it was an actual clipping of the newspaper. And he circled General MacArthur with an arrow that said Mac. So he says Mac, arrow with a circle around his head. And then he circles this guy right here, and he puts me. So he has me with an arrow pointing right here and Mac pointing right there. So in this famous Time Life video, actually there's video of it, this famous photograph taken by Carl Meidens. He's the one that gets the credit for, he was hired by Time Life to take many actual over the years. He actually took many famous photographs for Time Life. And I think this was, if I'm correct, I think this might have been his first, whatever you call it, big time photograph, his first famous photograph. He went on to take and work for Time Life for many years, and actually take many, you could Google it or look it up. It's Carl, C-A-R-L, Meidens, M-I-D-A-N-S. And I think that's, anyway, you'll find it. And he ended up, like I said, for many years after this photo was taken, he went on to take many famous photographs for Time Life, including, like I said, this one, of course, and that's why it's in that Time Life book that I showed you guys. So this one of the most famous photographs of World War II, this is a very famous one of the most famous ones, such a big monumental event with MacArthur returning to the Philippines, has my grandfather right there, smack dab, in the photo. And the reason he's in the photo is because he was a first sergeant at the time. He climbed the ranks very fast. My grandfather, we're talking about right now. So my grandfather moved up the ranks fast and became a first sergeant, which is like an E7 or E8 in the Army. And he was in his 20s. And so that was basically his platoon. That was his Higgins boat. And my grandfather, Joseph Rovnak, he made and successfully lived through 7 different beachheads. Now, you guys know what a beachhead is. If you ever watched Saving Private Ryan, and the opening scene is when they're all in a Higgins boat, which is one of these. And when you get to the beach, that big door flaps open like a ramp, and then all hell breaks loose. I'm just gonna go. That's all I'll tell you. You guys, if you want to go watch it or Google it, you'll see what happens. But to live through one beachhead was a big deal. It was hard to live through one of them because of what happens when that door comes down when you're in a battle zone. So my grandfather lived through 7 of them. Like I said, he went through hell. Like, war was hell for him. Like, he went through all of it. He's a true war hero for sure. And that was his platoon. They just happened to choose his platoon on his, the boat, on that Higgins boat. And they said, First Sergeant Rovnak, we're going to stage your men right there. We're going to, General Mack is going to use this Higgins boat for this photo op. Now, I said that there are other photographs or other angles taken, and there's different orientations. If you ever go to Google, you'll see what I mean. There's pictures where there's different people standing next to him as he's walking through the water and stuff like that. It could have always been the same boat they used, it could have been my grandfather's boat they used for every picture, but it could have been multiple ones. Who knows? But I can't imagine why he would use many different ones. It just doesn't really make sense. But there's some pictures where like that boat right there in the background looks like there's like number 614. Sorry. There's a close-up of my grandfather, by the way. I basically look just like him. But there's another picture where a boat in this spot and behind General Mack and those guys is a different number. So, photo ops like that, they'll take different angles and choose the best one. But this one, I'd say this one and maybe 1 or 2 other ones are the most widely accepted versions of this photo op, of this occurrence. And so I'm so sorry, this glare. You can see my glare right there. The whole time. Hope I'm not distracting you guys too much with it. But yeah, I just thought that was a killer story. I was trying to think of something to do today. I was like, man, because I have some, I say travel vlogs, but like out and about vlogs planned for later in the week and all that. And I just wanted to do something. I don't want to leave you guys hanging too much. And I thought it'd be a cool story. It just kind of dawned on me. It's like, oh, good story time. That'd be a perfect story. Because I walked by the picture today and it just dawned on me. So I'm sure some of you guys will find some appreciation in that, or appreciate that story and, history. I try to do story time. This is only my second one, but I'm trying to incorporate a little bit of everything, history and pop culture and all that stuff. So, yeah, so that's my grandfather. I can't even really call him my old man. It's my old ladies. Nope, because that'd be my wife. It's my mom's old man. And yeah, Joseph Rovnak, Army war hero, got chosen by pure chance to be in one of the most famous World War II video. I keep saying videos. I've been doing YouTube too long now. Photographs of all time. And how cool is that? My dad actually wrote to Time Life magazine and asked them if they could blow this photo up and so he could frame it and as a gift to me. And I think it was back in 2013, I believe. 2012 or 2013 for Christmas, my dad gifted it to me. And it's, again, one of my prized possessions. It's just amazing. It's beautiful. It's about, I don't know, I'd say 28 inches by about 14 inches, something like that. No, more than that. I'd say about 20 by 28. You know how I am with numbers. But, and he actually wrote back to them, or he wrote to them and said, hey, I'd like to have this photo. This is my son's, who served in the Marine Corps. This his grandfather in this famous photograph, and I'd like to have it blown up so I could frame it. And, he told, and he wrote them a letter, like this is all in a letter, like a handwritten letter, I believe, either that or an email. And he said, like I said, my dad said his son was in the Marine Corps, and this is his grandfather who served, and he's in that photograph and all that. And so Time Life, I actually have it in that book. It's a letter that Time Life wrote back when they sent back the picture, when they fulfilled my dad's order. And they said, Thank you so much for the information and letting us know who that is. That's so awesome. We'd be glad to give you guys, to blow up the picture and send it to you so you can frame it and all that stuff. And I don't know if they framed it or not. I don't know if my dad ordered it like that, but then they said, and tell your son to, thank you so much for his service, and thank you so much. And so they said, as a gift, because my dad bought this, he paid for this to get blown up and all that stuff, but as a gift, like gratis, they said, here's a gift from us for your son, and it's that book right there. They gift time. So that book right there is a gift from Time Life magazine, from them to me directly. 75 years, the very best of life. And also I have my Tabasco book there. I won a VIP tour of the McElhenney Tabasco factory back in 2011. It's a really good book, very colorful. And that book on top is just a college book. It's basically all to from my awesome inherited accounting lamp or library lamp on top of the super cool stereo cabinet. So yeah, that's it, guys. And I hope you like this story time. And if you want more like this or less like this, let me know. Or whatever you like more or less of, let me know. And signing off on this Tuesday night. You guys have a wonderful night, guys, and good night.